Hello students, welcome for this class. In this class, we are going to start with the next unit, that is unit number 4. In the last unit, we have discussed about the basic concepts related to the class, then how to create the class, then the use of objects, right? How to write the program using data members, then how to write the program using data members and member function, and finally we have seen the concept that is called as array. Then we have seen that how to use the array in Java, and we also seen few programs using class and objects and also using array. In this unit, we are basically going to discuss about the very important things in object-oriented programming language, that is called as constructor. Then second is method and method overloading, and finally is the constructor overloading. So let's start with this unit. So basically these are what the content for this particular unit, which is basically consisting of the two major topics. The very first is methods and second is the constructor. So we have talked about this term in methods when we discuss about the class. As we have defined the class, that the class is the collection of data members and the member functions. So those member functions are nothing but called as methods. So a method is nothing but what where we are grouping something, where we are writing some logic, and that particular logic should be identified by some name, and that particular name is nothing but called as the method. So whenever we want to define the methods in the Java program or in the class, so we are having some syntax, we are having some no fixed way or fixed type to define that particular method. Whereas whenever we want to define a method or the member function within a class, so we are having the syntax like initially we are supposed to specify the modifiers. So as we know that there are different types of modifiers in Java program or in object oriented programming language like private, protected and public. So accordingly we need to specify the modifier. Then each function or each method will be having a return type, that is the type of value that particular method is going to return, which can be either void, which can be int, float, double, that is totally depending upon that what sort of a value that particular function is supposed to return. Then next we are specifying the name of the method, that whichever method you want to assign, whichever method you want to define, and then in the bracket you may either have the parameter or may not have the parameter list, right? So if suppose the method is not having a parameter, so that particular method is called as the default method or a method without parameter. Whereas if the method is having some parameters or some parameter list, then that particular method is called as the uh, method with parameters. So the last time the example which you have seen or the example which you have executed for the class employee, so in that basically we have defined the two different methods, that is input and display. So the methods which we have displayed last time, those were the default methods because those methods are not having any parameters with it. So, so that is what the method is. The modifier it defines the access type. The way we are going to define this modifier, accordingly its accessibility will be get defined. If suppose we are defining certain method as a private, so that particular method will be accessible within that particular class. Means no other class will be able to access that particular method which is having the modifier as a private. Whereas if I define that modifier as a protected, it does mean that that particular method is accessible within that particular class. Also, it will be accessible to the class which is derived from that particular class. Means if suppose I am having class A and class B, and I am defining one method inside class A which is having a modifier as a protected, and a class B is being derived from the class A. In that case, the method which is defined as protected inside the class A will also be accessible in a class B, right? So that is what the modifier does. And third modifier which we are using, that is the public. So whenever we are specifying the modifier as a public before the method name, so that particular method name can be used anywhere in the project. Right? So that is what the modifier does. Then next is what we are having a return type, then the name of the method, right? That is absolutely the choice of the user or the programmer, that what method name the programmer wants to put for this or her program. And then the parameter list, it is again the optional thing. A method may or may not have the parameter list, and then we are writing the method body, that is the logic which we want to inbuild within that particular method. So this is how we are going to define the method. For example, no, I am written the modifier as a public, then return type as an integer, and then the function name as min function, and where I'm passing some parameters, that is int n1 and n2. So we can say that this is a function, or this is a method, that is a parameterized method, right? So let's jump to the Eclipse and we'll just try to modify the last program, and we'll try to make that program as an parameterized method, or the method with parameter. So if you remember, the last time we have just executed the employee program, and where we have no assumed the one dimensional array, where we created the array and we have just no call that array in the main function, and we have created the several objects for the using one object name, right? So let's say, and this is what the method, right, that is the input and display, which were used in the last program, were the default methods, because it were not having any parameters to it, right? So let's modify the same program. Let's say I'm just deleting this entire body. Also I'm just deleting this entire body from the main function. Okay, and now let's say we want to make this function as a parameterized function. So as we know that whenever we want to say the method as a parameterized method, so the method should have some parameters. So let's say I'm passing some parameters to it. Let's say int e, and then I'm, let's say, passing for name, I'm passing string n, and let's say for salary I'm passing float s. Fine. And let's say we are defining this body. Let's say what I'm doing is I'm just initializing these values or the parameters to the data member variables which are defined, that is name, salary, employee ID. Next is name. So I'm just assigning this n to the name, and finally is what, the salary. So I'm just assigning the value of s to the salary, right? So now this is what a function which is having the parameter, right? Whereas I'm just keeping the display function as it is. So you can see that in a single program we may have a parameterized function as well as the default function. Now when I want to call this function in the main function, so what we'll be doing, we'll be creating the objects, that is new e is my object, and I'm just calling the constructor now, that is employee. Now in this case it is having a default constructor, that is our next topic. So it'll be quite you will understand it, that what is the constructor does and what exactly it is doing in the program. Right now I want to call the function, right? So very first function is input, right? So now earlier we have called this input function without any parameters, because your function were not having any parameters, but now the function is having the 3 parameters. So accordingly I need to pass some values, that is I need to pass the first value for the employee ID. Second, I need to pass the values for the name, that is, let's say Ajay, and let's say third is what, I need to pass the value for the salary. Let's say I'm saying 35,000 rupees. Fine. So likewise I have called the function, that is the first function, and second I need to call the second function, that is a display function. So as a display function is not having any value to it, so I do not need to pass any value to the display function, right? So likewise I have called the input function and the display function. So let's try to execute this program. So now what we're getting, that is the employee ID is 23, that is this thing. The name is Ajay, right? And the salary is 35,000 rupees, right? So you can see that it is been get displayed, right? So this is what regarding the function or the methods which we can use within a Java program. Fine. So what we can see, what we can observe in this, that a single program may have this is what your default method, or the method which is not having any parameters, whereas the second method which we are having in the same program, that is the method which is having the parameter, that is the parameterized method, right? And again when we want to call this method inside the main function, so we have to make sure that we are just following the way we have declared the method. Means if it is having a parameter, in that case when we are calling the method it should have the parameter, right? And when we haven't declare the method without the parameters, or when we declare the method without parameters, so when calling it, we do not need to pass the parameters. That is the default method calling, right? And this is what the parameterized method calling, right? So this is how we can call the different methods. So I hope this program is quite clear and you understood that the meaning of the method, right? So, this is what regarding the method. The next topic which we are having, let's say a simple problem statement which has been given, that what sort of a question which can be asked related to the methods and the classes. So here the example is define a class department having a data members as a name of HOD, total students, and percentage of result, right? Define appropriate methods to initialize and display the values of these data members. Input the values for two objects and determine whose average result per student is better, right? So what is asked, that we are supposed to create the class department, right? So let's say I'm just creating one more class into the same program, and I will just write the partial thing about the program, and rest I will keep it to you, so that you just try to write the program. So what is asked, that you are supposed to define the class department. So I have defined the class department, right? So you can see that a department class has been created. Now inside the department you have given the data members as name of HOD, total student, and percentage of result. So I need to specify the data members, as we know that the name of the HOD will be but obviously the string, so I will be giving name of HOD, right? That is a string. Then next is what, the total students. So total student will be the integer, so I'll be defining it as an integer. Then next is what, the percentage of result, where the percentage of the result can be the float. So I'm declaring the percentage of result as float, percentage of students. I'm just making as percentage of student. Fine. So likewise, no, we have defined percentage of result, not the student. We have defined the different data members as asked in the program. Now what is asked, that define the appropriate methods to initialize and display the values, right? So what is required, we required the two different methods. Let's say I'm assuming two different methods, right? Everybody is free to choose the number of methods and the type of methods they want, right? Here I'm defining public void input, and let's say, as I no demonstrated in the last program, so in the similar context, let's say I'm just passing some parameters to it. So let's say for name I'm passing the string name, for total student let's say I'm passing one integer type variable, integer t, and for let's say I'm just making it as a double, and double percentage p, and also making it as a double because percentage will be having a number of decimals. Okay, fine. So that is our declare. And now let's define this particular function. So while definition, what I need to do is I need to initialize these values to the so what I will doing, that this student name is equals to s dot, sorry, name. Then next is I need to pass the total student to this. I'll just copy this code rather than typing the code. I'm just copying the total student is equals to t, and finally is the percentage of result, whereas percentage of result I initialize to the p value, that is p, right? So that is how I declare the parameterized function, that is the input. And let's say I will be having one more function, that is public void, and let's say I'm defining it as an output function. Fine. And let's say this function I'm not passing any parameters to this, and simply I'm using system dot out dot println. So system dot out dot println and I'm just printing the values which I'm passing to this, and what I'm saying, the name of the head is, and we are storing it in the variable name of the HOD. So I'll be requiring this variable again because this is a variable which will be storing the name of the HOD, right? The next, again, I'm just copy pasting this thing in order to print the same. That is the name of the HOD, then the total number of the student. The total number of the students are and it is stored in the total student variable. So I'm just copying this and I'm just pasting here, and again I'm just copying the same function, and let's say I'm just passing this, right? So now the total number of students are, and the last is the percentage of the result is result is, and it is stored inside this variable. So I'll be just passing this to here, right? So that's how I printed all the values. And finally, what is asked in the question that define the appropriate methods to initialize and display the values of these data members, and input the values for two objects and determine whose average results per student is better, right? So I need to create the objects. So in order to create the objects, I will be requiring a main method. So let's say I'm just passing this string arguments, and inside this, let's say create the objects. So I'll be having the class name as department. Let's say I'm creating the first object as d1, and let's say call the constructor that is department. Okay, so that's how I created the first object. And likewise, let's say I'm creating one more object because it's asked to create the two objects. So department d2 is what my second object. And now let's call the function. So I'm just calling the first d2 dot input. Fine. And as it is having the three parameters, so I need to pass the values. So let's say head IT is what the name of the HOD. Then second is what the total number of student is what, let's say, so it is an integer, so there is no need to pass in this double brackets. The string needs to be passed in a double bracket, whereas integer and float we can pass it directly. Then the percentage of result, let's say I'm saying that the IT department is having 95% of result, so 95.75, as we have declared the double, so it is perfectly okay. And let's say we are displaying the values, so display, fine. So d1 dot display, and likewise we will just calling this function using the second object d2 dot input and d2 dot display. Let's say the second HOD is HOD CSE, and let's say the intake is 130 and the result is 97.75. Fine. So d1, sorry, note the display function, this output function, that's where it's getting the error, and this is output function, right? So this is how I have written the program. Now let's check what we are getting now. So here you can get that the name of the HOD is head IT, the total number of students is 66, the percentage of result is 95.75, and this thing, right? But what is asked in the question, that input the values of two objects and determine whose average result per student is better. So what I need to do is I need to compare the result, right? So how we can compare that? Let's say I can write down if condition, if d1 dot, where we are storing the percentage of result here, if I can write down d1 dot percentage of result, right, is greater than, second condition is what, d2 of percentage of result, right? That is, I only need to check the percentage, so d2 of result. Then what I need to print, why I'm getting this result, because syntax token invalid, because I need to enclose this within a single brackets. Now it is okay, fine. Then I need to print that system dot out dot print ln, and here I'm saying that if this condition is true, in that case the result of IT department is Good. Okay. And again, it is asked the per student. So no, you can just modify the condition accordingly. I'm just keeping this thing up to you that how you are going to do it. Else I will just write down system.out.println the result of CSE department is good, right? And why we're getting the error here? Because else delete this token. If else, fine, no problem. And this is not required. So now my program is ready to go. So let's try to execute the program now. So here you're getting the result of CSE department is good because this condition that is, oh, sorry. Here I need to put the D2 actually. Fine. So now I have just tried to execute. So now you can see that the result of CSE department, because yes, we have put it, we have mentioned the result like this, that is 95.75, 97.75. If I just inverse the number, that is 97 here and 95.75 here, so now you will get the different result, right? The result of IT department is good, right? So likewise, the question can be asked, and no, you have to make your own assumptions, you have to assume your suitable data, so that your program should be more appropriate and it should justify or satisfy the problem statement. So that is what regarding the methods in Java program. So that's it for this particular class. So in the next class, we'll be discussing about the constructor, parameterized constructor, and passing the objects as parameters. And also we are going to see few programs based onto the constructor, right? So that's it for this class. Thanks for joining. Thank you.